All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our afternoon session on MPC Emerging Models. Our first talk today will be by Alex, and he will tell us about on linear communication complexity for maximally fluid MPC.
All right, yep, thanks for the introduction. This is joint work with Daniel and Antigone. So to get started, let's talk about the traditional client-server model for MPC. Okay, so in this model, we have some clients. They have some inputs. Possibly some of them are corrupted. Okay, and maybe there's some servers in the sky, and they want to outsource this computation of some function f on their inputs to these servers. Okay, and moreover, maybe some of these servers are also corrupted. And as usual, we want the adversary to learn nothing beyond the output. Okay, and so usually what happens is the parties secret share their inputs to these servers. Maybe the servers interact for a number of rounds, and then they reconstruct the output to these clients. However, there's some limitations to this traditional model. So first of all, what if the function that we're trying to compute is particularly expensive? So for example, training machine learning algorithms are very expensive. And of course, with MPC, it's even more expensive. Okay, and also, of course, even powerful servers can't stay online forever. Also, what if we can't or just don't want to rely on these powerful servers? Well, in that case, there's lots of motivation for computing in a sort of distributed fashion, namely using some blockchain. Okay, and this holds possibly even for very short computations. And so one answer is the so-called fluid MPC model. And in this model, there's a dynamic ephemeral committees of servers that compute F round by round. Okay, and nodes can participate in these committees basically as much or as little as they want. And this is sort of part of a collection of recent works that try to model MPC in more realistic settings. So going back to our picture, the clients now want to outsource their computation to some committees of servers. Okay, so this is actually just committee one. And as before, the clients will secret share their inputs to these servers. And then possibly there is some interaction between this first committee of servers. But actually, for the purpose of this talk, we're in the so-called maximal fluidity setting, which means that there's actually no intra-committee communication. So these servers won't talk to each other at all. What happens is that at some point, committee 2 will come online, and the servers of committee 1 will learn their identities. And then the first round of communication will actually be from the servers of committee 1 to those of committee 2 via some point-to-point channels. Okay, so intuitively, there is some computation along with some transfer, secure transfer of the execution state going on at the same time. Okay, so then yes, eventually committee 3 comes online, and the servers of committee 2 talk to committee 3, and so on until we get to some final committee M, who then reconstructs the outputs to the clients. Okay, now some additional details on the model. So first of all, the size of these committees can be dynamic, and moreover, parties can participate in as many committees as they want potentially. And then for corruption threshold, we consider it with respect to each individual committee of size n. So for honest majority, we assume that t less than n over 2 of the servers in each committee are corrupted. And similarly, for dishonest majority, it's t less than n for each committee. And just a couple of remarks now. So for the dishonest majority setting, we'll be doing it in the pre-processing model to get information theoretic security. And in this case, as with the prior work in this model, the pre-processing is executed among the entire global pool of of parties that might eventually be members of some committee. Okay, and this global pool might be of size big N that could be much bigger than little n, the committees, like each individual committee size. And as a second remark, in our paper, we just completely abstract out this committee selection process. The only thing that we require is that at some point, committee I learns the identity of only committee I plus 1. So that is to say that committee I doesn't learn the identity of I plus 2 or I plus 3 and so on. Okay, and this is the same as the previous papers in this setting as well. And just to give an idea of maybe how the selection process could be instantiated, one could use cryptographic sortition via VRFs. Okay, so now let's talk about the current feasibility results of this model. So first of all, the bottleneck in MPC is usually communication. And in the traditional setting, both for honest and dishonest majority setting, we know that linear overhead is possible. However, the existing fluid MPC protocols both have quadratic overhead, so both for dishonest and honest majority. So the question that we ask is, can we do better? Can we even get linear overhead as in the traditional setting? Okay, and our first result is by answering this question in the affirmative. So we give for both the dishonest majority with preprocessing and honest majority settings, information theoretic fluid MPC protocols with linear communication, maximal fluidity, and security with abort against active adversaries. So that's our first result. And then as a second result, we show that in the dishonest majority, in order to get this sub-quadratic communication, in fact, every party's preprocessing size must be big N times C, where again, this big N is the number of global parties, which might be potentially much bigger than the little n, which is each individual committee size. Okay, so first I want to talk about some related work briefly. First of all, I believe in the next session, there is a paper talking about maximally fluid protocols with perfect security and guaranteed output delivery for T less than n/3 corruptions. And also there is this YOSO model, which is a very similar committee-based model. But unlike in our model, the current committee never actually learns the actual identities of the next committee. Okay, and furthermore, the current committee can actually communicate to arbitrary roles arbitrarily in the future using so-called using pseudonymous roles and without actually knowing their identities ever. Okay, and they give information theoretic and computational protocols with GOD in the honest majority setting. And I just want to say that you can actually cast fluid in this YOSO model where one committee only talks to the next committee using these same sort of pseudonymous role functionality. Okay, and also there's been a number of works that study MPC where parties can drop out or fail and so on. And so yeah, this has been a popular area. Okay, so now let me talk about some technical results. So of course, the main primitive that we need to construct is multiplication. And so one way to do this is by using the so-called king technique from DN07 with beaver multiplication triples. And yeah, for this slide, I'll just be using this bracket V notation to denote some abstract secret sharing that I'm not going to define. Okay, so here we have 3 committees of servers. The first committee has sharings of X and Y, which is what we want to multiply. And let's just say they also have some beaver triples. So A, B, and C such that C equals A times B. And this part is kind of easy to instantiate. Okay, and so what we're going to do is every party will mask X and Y with A and B respectively, reconstruct to the king in committee 2, who then sends these D and E values to committee 3. And then it's well known that if this committee 3 has the same multiplication triple, then they can compute the multiplication via some linear combinations. Okay, but what I kind of swept under the rug here is, how does this third committee actually get this triple from the first committee? Okay, and so that's sort of the core primitive that we study in this work, and we call it secure message transmission with committees. So just to define it a little bit more formally, we have Alice on the left with some input S, some committees of servers between her and Bob, and Alice will communicate with committee 1, who will communicate with committee 2, then 3, who then sends to Bob. Okay, and Bob will output some S prime, which obviously for correctness, we want to be the same as S. And then for security, just looking at semi-honest corruptions for now, we want that no information about S is revealed. Okay, and yes, of course, I drew all these lines, but naturally we'll want to minimize communication as much as possible. So as I said before, this is an important building block for multiplication in fluid MPC. But you can actually even think about it more generally in that each committee during this computation needs to somehow transmit the current execution state to the next committee. So basically, no matter what techniques you actually use, this is underlying any fluid MPC protocol. And so in the previous CGG plus paper, they instantiate this primitive with n² communication. And what we do is indeed decrease it to linear overhead. And the prior paper in the dishonest majority, RS22, does in fact have linear overhead, but their construction requires big omega of big N times S pre-processing per party. Okay, and we show that this trade-off is actually inherent. And I just want to recall again that RS22 for their whole fluid MPC protocol does in fact require quadratic communication. And more or less this comes from complications due to active security. Okay, so let's quickly recall CGG plus protocol. So they're going to use degree T Shamir secret sharing and just the typical resharing technique. So this first committee will have shares of S, and what they'll do is they'll just reshare their shares to committee 2. And then it's well known that if these parties in committee 2 take proper linear combinations of their shares of shares, then they'll get a new secret sharing of the same underlying value S. And of course, security intuitively comes from the fact that, the adversary only gets T shares of any secret sharing, and so then we're good. So how we improve things is we actually use degree 2T Shamir sharings, along with an additional re-randomization step. So the parties in committee 1 will have degree 2T shares of S. And what they'll do in the first step is very simple. They'll just send their share directly to the corresponding server in the next committee. And of course, this is still fine because the adversary will only have 2T shares, and we're using degree 2T. Okay, but of course, we can't just do this indefinitely. So if we want to repeat this for another committee, so this is the situation sort of shifted where the adversary has the first 2 shares. And what we'll use is this technique from DN07, where we can get O of n degree 2T random sharings of 0 with n² total cost. So linear amortized communication. And I just want to note that eventually for our full fluid MPC protocol, this will mean that we have to assume that each layer of the circuit has omega n width in order to claim linear communication. But okay, so this committee 2 on the left will also have degree 2T shares of 0. And what they'll do is they'll just add their shares of S and their shares of 0 together And again, just send in a straight line to the servers of the next committee. Okay, and of course, the underlying secret will still be the same. And also, it's still secure intuitively because the adversary only has t degrees of freedom of the 0 sharing. So we still have t degrees of freedom left, which means that we can perfectly simulate this communication with random values. Okay, so that's it for honest majority. Let's take a look at dishonest majority, first by looking at the RS-22 protocol. So in this case, they use additive sharings, as well as shared randomness from the pre-processing phase that will be of omega big N times S per party. Namely, each pair of parties Pi, Pj in the global pool will have some shared random value Rij. So these are the values that these committees share with each other. And committee 1 will have an additive sharing of S. And what each server in this committee will do is just add to S1 the randomness that they share with the servers in committee 2. And again, just send in a straight line like before. And then to define their new shares, committee 2 will just add in all of the randomness that they share with the servers of committee 1. And if we add all of these values together, basically we'll see that all of the shared randomness cancels out. So indeed, we still have a secret sharing of S. And again, security comes from the fact that the adversary will never have this R1 2N value, which means that we can perfectly simulate this communication with the random value. Okay, so now I'll give some intuition on our lower bound. So let's say that in these two committees, everybody but the first two servers in each committee, sorry, the first server in each committee is corrupted. So only 1 and n+1 are uncorrupted. That means that the adversary sees all communication except from 1 to n+1. So in order to have SMT, we need some communication from 1 to n+1. But moreover, if 1 and n+1 don't share any randomness, that means that the adversary will always be able to simulate this communication from 1 to n+1, and so then there can't be any security. So that in fact means that every party in these two committees needs to share some randomness. And moreover, we could have had corruptions anywhere. So yeah, we need that really every party needs shared randomness. And also, any party in the global pool could have been in these two committees. So that means that every pair of parties in the whole global pool must need shared randomness. And that's how our lower bound follows. Okay, and then just a short overview of the remaining details for the full-on MPC protocol. For malicious security, we'll use information theoretic max and the circuit randomization technique that follows from RS-22. And this is even for the honest majority, since we use degree 2t sharing, which means that we can't rely on error detection. Okay, and particularly in the dishonest majority setting, there are many details that need to be worked out to actually make sure you get linear communication. Okay, and then we use our Beaver multiplication-based multiplication protocol for both honest and dishonest majority, where in the honest majority, the Beaver triples are generated on the fly using this technique from DN07 for amortized linear communication. And for our dishonest majority, these triples come from the pre-processing. Okay, and then once we have multiplication, of course, addition and identity gates follow similarly. So to conclude, we build maximally fluid MPC protocols for both honest and dishonest majority with linear communication overhead and security with abort against malicious adversaries. We also show that in order to get this efficiency in the dishonest majority setting, the pre-processing must be large. And just some open problems now. So for t less than n over 3, one main open problem is to improve the efficiency of the GOD protocols that will be presented in the next session. And also for t at least n over 3, one thing that could be done is to add either GOD or identifiable abort to these protocols, or also to remove our assumption of omega n width for all layers of the circuit that we need to get linear communication. Okay, thank you, that's it.
Questions for Alex? You can step up to the mic. Oh, you're the next speaker. So I'm trying to understand the relation between Yosso and your model. Is it correct that your model is a special case of Yosso?
So the exact way that it's specified is that committee I actually will learn some public keys of committee I plus 1. But you can sort of phrase it in the same way as Yosso, in that if you just have some sort of pseudonymized public keys for the servers in committee I plus 1, then it is kind of the same as Yosso, except that we're only allowed to communicate with the immediate next committee, whereas I think Yosso allows to communicate arbitrarily far in the future.
And in this context, does your lower bound have any interpretation in the Yosso, or this doesn't hold there? And also your lower bound, if you would allow communication inside the committee, I guess that would not.
So for the first question, I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it would still apply. I don't know if there have been any Yosso works in the pre-processing setting, to be honest. For your second question, it will help some if there's multiple rounds of interaction in a single committee, but it should still hold that every time you transfer from one committee to the next, you need pre-processing to do this communication. And it should be the same amount of pre-processing, yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, thanks Alex again.
Thank you.
Okay, we will continue with our next talk by Indian, who will tell us about cryptography with weights, MPC encryption, and signatures.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Thanks, Mariana, for the introduction. So I'm Mingyuan. I'm going to tell you about cryptography with weights, MPC encryption, and signatures. This is joint work with Sanjam, Abhishek, Pratay, Rohit, and Inu. So So in this work, we study threshold cryptography and MPC. These are fundamental primitives that has been extensively studied in the prior literature. And in all these primitives, the common trust assumption is that they are all follow the following common trust assumption, that first, there is a privacy threshold small t, such that if an adversary corrupts a subset of party with less than t number of parties, the security guarantee should hold. On the other hand, there is also a reconstruction threshold capital T, such that if more than capital T number of honest party behave honestly, we should have correctness. And in the literature, both the sharp threshold setting and the RAM setting has been studied. The sharp threshold setting meaning that the reconstruction threshold and the privacy threshold is exactly apart by 1. And in the RAM setting, it means there is a large gap between the privacy threshold and the reconstruction threshold. So although this framework has been very successful, in many of the emerging applications, this one party, one vote paradigm is no longer sufficient. So imagine you are trying to do a threshold signature in the stake-based blockchain setting. You probably want the guarantee that enough number of stake have signed on the message, instead of saying that it's enough number of party have signed your message. Therefore, it is natural to consider this weighted setting where each party is assigned with some weight Wi, and now your trust assumption is that security should hold as long as the adversary corrupts any subset of party with cumulative weight smaller than this small t. And on the other hand, the correctness should hold as long as I have enough parties with cumulative weight greater than capital T behave honestly. And in this paper, in particular, motivated by the real-world applications, we will only consider small weight, in particular, those weights we consider are polynomial in the security parameter. Now, despite being a natural generalization of the unweighted setting, essentially the only way we know how to do weighted setting generically is through the following virtualization approach. That is, if you have a party with weight Wi, it's going to be treated as Wi virtual parties, and then you reduce the weighted setting to the unweighted setting by doing the unweighted protocol with capital W many of virtual parties. So this capital W here is the summation of the total weights. And clearly, this virtualization approach introduced a multiplicative overhead Wi on each party, because a party with Wi need to play Wi virtual parties, meaning that all the communication and the computation this party does will be multiplied by Wi. Now, the objective of our work is that can we realize the weighted setting more efficiently? Ideally, we would like this efficiency to be completely independent of the weight, but as a first step in this direction, in this work, we want to ask, can we make this multiplicative overhead additively dependent on the weight? So if you want to leave the talk now, the key take-home message in this work is that the answer is yes, if there is a sufficient gap between the reconstruction hold and the privacy threshold. In particular, as long as there is a lambda bit gap between capital T and small t, where lambda is the security parameter, we can generically realize this in many scenarios. Okay, so at the technical core of this paper is we constructed this weighted ramp secret sharing schemes. And suppose, let's say W1 to Wn defines the weight of each party, and the capital T and the small t gives you the reconstruction and privacy threshold. Assuming that there's a gap lambda between capital T and small t, this secret sharing scheme is a secret sharing for lambda bit secret, such that the share size of each party is exactly Wi. This is in comparison to a Shamir secret sharing with virtualization approach, where the share size would be Wi times lambda. So we shaved off a lambda factor in the share size. And this secret sharing scheme is perfectly correct and statistically secure. In particular, it's based on the Chinese remaindering theorem-based secret sharing, or the CRT-based secret sharing. Essentially, we observed that this weighted RAM secret sharing that we constructed can be generically applied to secret sharing based MPC and the threshold encryption and the signature schemes. And all these applications inherit the efficiency gain we have for the secret sharing schemes. And I want to, in particular, highlight the fact that this weighted RAM secret sharing scheme is nonlinear, which presents several technical challenges, and I hope to tell you some of them in the rest of the talk. So before I dive into the technical part, let me just quickly mention a couple of prior works. So the weighted secret sharing scheme has been studied before. In particular, the work of Beimel et al. Constructed a computational weighted secret sharing from one-way function. And they achieved the efficiency, their share size is polynomial in the number of parties n, and it's completely independent of the weight W. And in another recent work by Ben Hamoda et al., they also considered the weighted secret sharing in the RAM setting, where there's a large gap between the privacy threshold and the reconstruction threshold. And the efficiency of their secret sharing schemes is also independent of the weight Wi. Now, our work in comparison to these two works does not achieve the ideal goal that the efficiency is completely independent of the weight Wi. However, our work still preserved the algebraic structure of the secret. Hence, our secret sharing schemes can be applied to the secret sharing based MPC and threshold cryptography, while these two lines of works completely break the algebraic structure of the secret. Okay, so now let me tell you a bit about what is this CRT-based secret sharing. So imagine you have a secret S which lives in some field F with order P0. In the CRT-based secret sharing, every party is assigned with some integer Pi, and these Pi's are assumed to be co-primes. So for simplicity, you can assume all these Pi's are distinct prime numbers. To share a secret, basically you re-randomize this secret S as some random integer capital S, such that capital S modulo P0 equals to the secret S. Now I won't tell you how exactly the distribution of this capital S is, but I just want to highlight the fact that this capital S is an integer, not a ring element or a field element. And the ith secret share will be exactly this capital S modulo Pi. Now, how do you reconstruct the secret in this CRT-based secret sharing schemes? Essentially, every secret share you see, it tells you one modular equation of this capital S. And once you have enough modular equation about this integer S, you can use the CRT Chinese remaindering theorem to reconstruct this secret S. And once you reconstruct this secret S, you will be able to recover the small secret field element S. Now, let me try to provide you with some intuition why the CRT-based secret sharing is a good candidate for constructing weighted secret sharing schemes. This is essentially because since each party Pi receive this capital S modulo Pi, the number of information this party receives is exactly log Pi. Essentially, this means that it gives us a fine-grained way to control how much information a party should receive. And this is, in some sense, exactly what we want in the weighted secret sharing schemes, where a party with large weight should receive more information than a party with smaller weight. Therefore, it's natural to just consider that we will set the number of bits a party receives, which is log Pi, to be exactly its weight Wi, which equivalently is that we will set this Pi to be roughly 2 to the Wi. Now, this setting the Pi's in this way is exactly aligned with the definition of the XX structure, because an authorized A, by definition, will have the fact that their cumulative weight is greater than some threshold capital T, meaning that the information they receive about the secret integer is enough to reconstruct. On the other hand, for an unauthorized set B, the cumulative weight will be, by definition, will be smaller than some threshold, meaning that they have small enough information about the secret integer such that no information about the secret is leaked. So this roughly is why, and I want to mention that in setting the parameter in this way, every time the weight increased by 1, we only increase the share size by 1. This is in contrast to Shamir secret sharing, where when the weight increased by 1, you will increase the share size by lambda bit by a field element. Now let me try to tell you why we can use these secret sharing schemes in the applications of MPC and threshold cryptography. So first, for the weighted MPC, we ask the question whether we can do information theoretic MPC in the honest majority setting. That is, the number of parties being corrupted, small t, should be less than half of the total weight. And the question we ask is very simple. Can we just plug in our secret sharing schemes in the BGW framework and construct the MPC protocol? And the answer is yes, it works similarly, but there are some subtle differences. So let me try to tell you a bit about both. Right. So imagine you have two secret X and Y. They are secret shared via this random integer capital X and capital Y. You get the secret share xi and yi about this secret integer capital X and capital Y. When you locally add up your secret share in the modular Pi sense, you get the modular equation that one modular equation about the secret integer you are sharing. And the fact that capital X plus capital Y is exactly the integer that satisfy all these modular equations tells you that they are exactly sharing X plus Y. That tells you that when you do the local addition, you are implicitly doing, the secret you are sharing is exactly the addition of small x plus small y. And this works similarly for multiplication. And this works perfectly. It seems like we don't even need interaction to do MPC. Is that the case? Unfortunately, this is not the case because actually the integer that is associated with each secret is secretly growing. And when the secret becomes too large, in particular, if it's larger than the product of all the PIs, you won't be able to reconstruct this secret S. Therefore, in order to get correctness, we need to control the growing of this integer. And the first observation is that if you are just doing addition, this integer doesn't grow too fast. It actually grows pretty slowly. So for a polynomial size circuit, this is not an issue. However, I want to mention here that this is a subtle difference between CRT-based secret sharing and Shamir secret sharing. For any linear secret sharing, you can do the addition infinite many times, it will still be correct. But for CRT-based secret sharing, this is not the case. However, addition doesn't grow slowly, but for multiplication, the integer x actually grows quite fast. So in particular, if your two secret is shared via integers of roughly the same size, when you multiply these two secrets, the integer associated with this product of the secret is actually double in terms of how long this secret is. So this is similar to Shamir secret sharing in the sense that every time you do multiplication, the degree doubles. Here you can think of the length of the secret integer as the counterpart of the degree of the polynomial in the Shamir secret sharing. Now that we established this connection between CRT-based secret sharing and Shamir secret sharing, the idea is very simple. It's just that after every multiplication, we need to do a degree reduction to reduce the size of the integer, or in our case, it's an integer reduction. Now, okay, I will refer you to the more details about MPC, about all these informal claims to the paper. Let me now tell you a bit about some of the technical issues for when apply the secret sharing schemes to the threshold crypto setting. So although MPC is a generic way to construct any function you want to construct, but in threshold crypto, sometimes you need, for example, one basic task you always want to do is that suppose you have a secret sharing of S, and you want to reconstruct the G to the S where G is some generator of some cryptographic groups. You don't want to use MPC to do this because this means you have to open up the description of the group is a non-black box use of the group. So instead, you want to ask whether can I just use, for example, Lagrange interpolation on the exponent, just like Shamir secret sharing? Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. And this is where the nonlinearity manifests itself. So this is, recall how do you reconstruct a secret in the CRT-based secret sharing? So here you have to take your secret share Si, and similarly multiply a similar notion as the Lagrange coefficient in the sense that here the lambda I is exactly the integer that modular equals to 1, modular Pi, but equals to 0, modular all Pj, J does not equals to I. Once you establish this secret integer, once you take the sum of all Si and lambda I, you have to modular P, which is the product of all the P1 to Pn, to establish what is the secret integer S associated with this secret S. And only after that, you will modular P0 to find out what is the secret. Now, suppose you do what you normally do in Shamir secret sharing, where you broadcast G to the S, broadcast G to the Si, and hope to do Lagrange interpolation on exponent to establish this G to the S. What you are implicitly doing on the left on the exponent is what's written on the left-hand side. You are not modular the capital P to reconstruct the secret integer first, where the correct way to reconstruct secret must first modular capital P. Now, what we propose to solve this problem is that we will ask each party to locally first do this Si times lambda I, and then modular this P first. Now, this doesn't seem to solve the problem easily because you still not modular P. In particular, if each party computes this Ri, which is Si times lambda I modular P, then the secret S is still the summation of all these Ris minus some overflow. And however, the idea is it brings us more closer to our goal in the sense that we now know that this overflow won't be too large. In particular, if I have n numbers in the range from 0 to p, I add them up, the overflow will at most be from 0 to n minus 1. We narrow down the possibility of this overflow number to in a size of n. Now, when we apply this to threshold algorithm encryption, the idea is that we can use this encryptor to send additional information about what this alpha should be, and this can help the parties to uniquely identify which alpha will give you the correct G to the S. And finally, we will also construct a weighted threshold ECDSA for the threshold signature in similar manner. Okay, so now before I end my talk, let me just mention that after this work, we also have a bunch of follow-up works. For the weighted threshold signature in the sharp threshold setting, we have a follow-up work also concurrently by Das et al., who constructed a threshold signature where the efficiency of the entire scheme is completely independent of the weights. That means both the partial signature and the reconstruction are independent of the weights. And this builds upon the ideas from Snark literature. On the other hand, for threshold encryption, for weighted threshold encryption in the sharp threshold setting, we also have another ongoing work where the efficiency of the entire scheme is partially independent of the weight. That means parties' secret state and their partial decryption are independent of the weight, but the aggregation of this partial decryption still depends on the weight. And you can think of our this weighted threshold encryption as a better computational weighted secret sharing schemes compared to prior works. But of course, in this scheme, we use the pairing, and the prior works only use the one-way function. And with that, I will end my talk here. Thank you.
Any questions? Could you come to the mic?
Thanks for a great talk. I had a question concerning the method for reconstructing group generated race to the secret.
Yeah.
You said that you were going to, in the concept of encryption, you're going to give the parties some extra hint so they could reconstruct the alpha value.
Yeah.
But if you get the alpha value, doesn't that reveal some information about the shares of the honest parties?
Yes, that's a very good question. So in our threshold encryption, we only consider CPA security. So you never actually, the security never sees this alpha. And that's the question is whether this alpha leaks any information about the secret S. That's an excellent question. We don't know whether that leaks any information or not.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm still confused because if parties don't learn the alpha, how do you correct for that error there?
They do learn the alpha. It's just that in our security definition, we don't allow the parties to query the decryption of oracle for enough parties. They only see a small set of parties. So we don't. So the thing is that we don't. The encryptor doesn't directly tell you what alpha is. That's not included in the ciphertext. The ciphertext includes a hash of G to the S. By comparing that, by trying all the possibility of alpha, you can find out which agrees with the hash. So the alpha is not directly leaked. But you're right, if you are consider in some sense a CCA security, then you will learn alpha, and we don't know whether that's secure or not. Yes.
And I have one question. I was wondering, are there constructions where instead of just using weights to determine how much each party contributes, you have some more complicated access structure than just like simply adding the weights and looking for a threshold, some, I don't know, Boolean.
I don't think the techniques we developed here can help with more. I don't know, like, but we only consider weighted access structure in this work.
Okay, great. Let's thank the speaker again. We'll continue with the next talk in 10 minutes to be able to sync with the other track.
I want to